Welcome. This is session number 5 on the focal framework metadata layer. I recommend you, as always, to look at the previous sessions to get a more complete understanding. In the previous session, we looked on how you could store semantic metadata about any data model in the metadata layer. In this session, we will explore how that can be used to represent semantic integration. In the agenda today, we will look on how focal looks on semantic integration, how the model to support that looks like, and a quick walkthrough of the different focals. We will look at some examples, and then we will look how we can combine the data in the metadata model to see the model lineage. In the semantic integration from a focal perspective, we always talk about sort of translating a local model vocabulary into a common model vocabulary. And that means we look at attributes and domain values. In the calls source example, we had something called rcat, which in the business information model represented by a risk category. And these two different attributes had different domain values that we could map from 1 representing low, and a 2 representing a medium, and 3 representing high. So how is this done? First of all, the model and the entity focal is not necessary. But on the other hand, they are nice from a model lineage perspective. But from a semantic integration perspective, they are optional. So this works pretty simple. You represent the different models independent of each other in the model representation. And the model representation would be the model, entity, attribute, domain, and the domain value focals. You then follow the focal implementation process, where we create mappings between the different models from a semantic perspective on attribute and domain value level. We first take out the attributes and the domain values that we want to integrate and create integration points. This is because we want to do a separation of concern and have a focal where we can describe each integration point, an attribute or a domain value, from an integration perspective and not from a pure model perspective, and that we don't want to mix that information in the same focals. Then these integration points get mapped against each other as source to target mapping in a relationship table. That relationship table relates as well to atomic context, that is the integration is all about, and what physical column that the implementation target is of the integration. We can also describe different integration rules on that specific row of integration. If it's an example, if a column in the source is missing a value, you might want to apply a default value for it. That information is stored in the integration point rule focal. That also relates into the integration relationship. Now, this might seem like hard work and a lot of steps, but the focal framework offers a mapping template in Excel that the user can use to fill in the integration information. And then there are jobs that loads the information from that Excel into the metadata layer. Sometimes users of the focal framework build graphic interfaces directly onto the metadata layer. And then you can in real time add, change, remove mapping information as the mapping work is done. More on how the focal integration process really works and what steps you take will be in the official Focal Framework course that will be released in December 2021. An example. First, we have the business information model documented as metadata. Here, with one example of an attribute and one domain value. We can also see the atomic context from a focal logical model is in the relationship of the BIM. And then we can see source data with its entity, attribute, and domain values. As you can see, they are totally separated from each other. What we do next is to document how a source model is used to integrate data into the business information model, and at that same time, the logical focal model and its physical implementation column. What we first do is to create something we call the integration points, that is, attributes and domain values we want to integrate between. In this example, we create data instances for the attributes risk category and RCAT, and for the domain values low and 1. And then we relate them. We create a relationship between RCAT should be represented in the business information model as risk category. And that is one row in the relationship table. The second row would be the representation of a domain value 1 for RCAT, that it should be represented as a risk category's domain value low. On each of these rows, we can see integration rules. We have the possibility to relate specific integration rules for each of these rows of integration. In the example, we could say that if RCAT column in the source is empty for one of the loans, then we should apply the default value low, meaning that there is no loans all the loans should have a risk category, and if it's undefined, it should be low. This is, of course, a business rule. With this metadata, our model lineage grow even further. We can now also relate how a source data model becomes integrated into the data warehouse from a semantic perspective, in relationship to how it relates to the business information model, and how the business information model in its turn relates to the focal logical model, and how the focal logical model is represented in the physical model. And just to make it clear once again, the focal model and the entity focal is optional, but it gives us further understanding of our model lineage. In the next session, we will look how this metadata is used in the focal physical implementation. I will show how the code interacts with the metadata to load the data layer and create a semantic integration of data in a repeatable pattern. Thank you.